And it's just so exciting to then compare it to what's going on in society and conversations about race. So it just builds and builds.
Do you think our overall discussions have changed, though, given this knowledge that we really understand that the categories that I'm checking on the census, that all of us check, that are used in research, that we use every single day, those categories really don't make a lot of sense?
One of the first things that we found that we were exploring in it is that people do not change their identification because of DNA tests. You'll test somebody and they find something that is totally unexpected, and then they just double down on their identity. I had a young man who identifies as Irish, and his background came up as British, and he said, yeah, that damn test, let's get rid of that. And so we actually find that people do not. However, they do add this information to their narratives over time.
Anita is not saying that the identities or boxes we check are meaningless.
If you were talking about mass incarceration, if you were talking about income inequality, you need to talk about race in some particular ways that are socially constructed. If you were talking about medicine and how you target medicine, you need to talk about race in a different way. And so when we talk about social construction, we are saying, how useful is this definition? Does it help us? And when it helps us gain insight and understanding, we should use it. If it is not helping us, if it's limiting us, then we need to reconstruct it in different ways. The world just is. So we have to construct it through language or whatever, but we need to continually revisit how we construct it.
Anita says looking at DNA and ancestry, those percentages and where in the world your ancestors came from, it could give us more appreciation of our shared human history of suffering and migration.
I think we are joined as human beings in that human history is grisly. People don't leave a place because if everything was great. There's a lot of famine and poverty and war. And I think having that conversation that connects us is important. And I think it helps us realize that we have to make choices about moving forward in positive ways.
Anita Foman leads the DNA discussion project at Westchester University in Pennsylvania. Aspect in Philadelphia recently hosted a workshop titled Claiming Your Identity, where people could have an open and honest conversation about who they are.
You know, it's really, really tricky, and how do you put it in nutshells?
Michelle Fuji is the co-founder of Unit Zoju, a drum performance troupe from Portland, Oregon. She says it's tricky because identity has so many components.
You know, I could give adjectives of my own character. I could also talk about my horoscope, the fact I'm an only child. Family structures define who we are. Also geographic. You know, I'm a West Coast girl. For me, this idea of otherness has weighed heavily upon me. I'm a Japanese American, 4th generation.
Michelle's grandparents were interned during World War II, and she says that experience shaped her family for generations.
So I didn't grow up speaking Japanese, not from choice, but because they were too afraid. Going back to Japan, I, of course, was super clumsy with speaking. Japanese were just like, what's wrong with you? You look Japanese. And trying to explain like all that history, and you can't do that. There's a longer tale that can't be told in buying soap.
We're talking about identity, and coming up, Australian farmers are a tough bunch, and asking for help when you're down doesn't seem like an option.
We're pretty hopeless buggers, aren't we? You know, we always cover our feelings and we pretend we don't have them, we're strong and all that, but he said sometimes we don't feel like that, do we?
That's next on The Pulse.
I'm Marty Moscow-Wayne, Today Radio Times. What we have learned this week about the president, the impeachment process, and the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. That's Radio Times this morning at 10, tonight at 11, right here on WHYY.
Supporting WHYY,
Penn Medicine's Heart and Vascular Center. Whatever you want from life is within your reach, because groundbreaking heart and vascular treatments are within theirs. At Penn Medicine, they're exploring the boundaries of the human heart so you can explore the boundaries of yours. It's one more reason why your life is worth Penn Medicine. More information is available at pennmedicine.org/heartandvascular. That's pennmedicine.org/heartandvascular. And Museum of the American Revolution, presenting Cost of Revolution, the life and death of an Irish soldier. This limited-run exhibition follows the journey of Richard St. George, an Irish artist and officer in the British Army, whose personal trauma and untimely death reveal the entangled histories of the American and Irish revolutions, with artifacts from across the globe, including Wolfe Tone's bloodstained wallet from 1798, open September 28th. Learn more at amrevmuseum.org.
Supporting WHYY, Bryn Mawr Trust Wealth Management, helping clients with financial planning and advice for 130 years. More information available at bmt.com. That's bmt.com.
This is The Pulse, stories about the people and places at the heart of health and science. I'm Megan Scott. We're talking about identity, how our sense of self defines us. For many of us, what we do for a living is a big part of our identity. So what happens when an outside force threatens that?
Hello from the Bureau of Meteorology. We're here with an update on the ongoing heatwave and elevated fire conditions. Severe heatwave conditions are continuing today over a large part of New South Wales, extending into
Australia is no stranger to drought, but the weather has been extreme in recent years, with record temperatures and prolonged dry periods. Scientists warn that severe heat waves could strike much more frequently by the end of this century. Climate change presents an economic threat to farmers in Australia, but it's also threatening their mental health and how the farmers view themselves. Ashley Ahern brings us this story from farm country in the state of Victoria.
I visited Australia at the end of a long, hot summer. The landscape was brown, and farmers were anxiously waiting for rain.
When you're out and about, if you're talking to farmers, they're all talking about water. They're talking about, oh, we need this autumn break this year or we're buggered. And a lot of people are holding on for that last straw.
Nick James is one of those farmers. We're standing next to a dusty pasture on his sheep farm about 2 hours north of Melbourne. Nick's 32, with a beard, broad shoulders, and a warm, quick laugh. But he says these days he's had a hard time staying positive.
You see it every day, mentally, in people, and myself. Like, I've dealt with it before. When you're just that far in and you don't know what you got to do and you got to keep going, it's pretty draining sort of stuff.
A deep drought took hold in Australia in the late 90s. People refer to it as the Millennium Drought. And things haven't really gotten back to normal since then. At least not in the southeastern part of the country where I traveled. Over these past 2 decades, the region has seen significantly less rainfall than historic averages. 60% of the dairy farms here have gone out of business since the drought began, and water has become so expensive that some farmers have had to kill their animals because they can't afford to keep them alive. Nick had to cut back the size of his flock and change the way he manages his sheep. Back when water was affordable, he'd irrigate his fields and let his sheep out to graze freely. Now he keeps them in a confined lot and feeds them hay, which also costs more than it used to. The drought and all the stress that has come with it has affected Nick's mental health. A few years ago, he was in a really dark place. He and his wife Georgie were pouring everything they had into raising their kids and running the farm. But Nick was feeling a lot of pressure as the water disappeared and the debt piled up.
Yeah, I've sort of become not being so positive. I'm normally a pretty positive, upbeat fella. Always looking forward, and I just like, I had enough and I thought everyone was against me. But yeah, I think that's when I realised that I've got to stop being so positive. Yeah, definitely drinking a lot of alcohol. Probably spending a bit of time in bed, I think I was just down on it.
Anthony Hogan was part of a team that surveyed the social and economic impacts of the Millennium Drought on farmers who
What I know from people who have attempted suicide numerous times is that mentally they think this is not an option. Sometimes I think my family's better off without me, they're better off with the insurance payout, or I am such a failure, I am not worth living on this planet.
Jenny O'Connell is a clinical social worker and therapist in Shepparton, Victoria. It's a small urban hub amidst the farming country north of Melbourne. She's lived in the community for 50 years. Her husband sold real estate, and they raised their 2 daughters here. And that really matters. When it comes to therapy, Jenny says rural people can be skeptical about getting help from people who are not from their community.
They won't ask for help because they're very proud and independent, and quite often when there are some sort of catastrophic event, people come from outside. There are lots of services that's thrown, money and services are thrown at the area short term, but they won't trust, and they certainly won't buy in fully to the support that's available. And any work that's with farmers has to be somehow in their community and somehow born of them.
As the Millennium Drought wore on, Jenny knew she was in a position to help the farmers in her community. She and her husband Patrick started a program called Leading from Within that brought together small groups, just 4 to 6 people usually, to talk about trauma and suicide prevention. Jenny would hear about farmers who were struggling and invite them personally. Often couples would attend together. They'd meet regularly, over a period of a year or more, and Jenny and Patrick would conduct the sessions together.
Patrick can always talk about things. Increasing your nose, Colin in, and he'd say things like, we're pretty hopeless buggers, aren't we? We always cover our feelings and we pretend we don't have them, we're strong and all that, but he said sometimes we don't feel like that, do we? And the guys will find that much easier to relate to, and often then start to share really deep stuff.
Jenny says farmers are often very connected. They share local news, information, contacts, but opening up and being vulnerable with one another is a bigger ask.
There are times when we've run sessions and we just come away absolutely humbled, absolutely in awe of the courage that people have shown to express this deepest stuff. You get to see the real humanity, and then they can heal.
But taking that first step, working up the courage to get in your pickup and go sit down with a stranger and share things that aren't often talked about, can be the hardest part. It certainly was for Nick James, the sheep farmer we met earlier. He's one of Jenny's clients. When he was struggling, drinking a lot and staying in bed for days at a time, it was his wife, Georgie, who urged him to get help.
Georgie's pretty stubborn. She didn't really give me an option. She said, well, we're going to have to do something about this, and...
Was it hard for you to decide to go see Jenny?
Yeah, bloody hell it was.